Hello everyone and welcome to a series of lectures in business statistics. Your faculty is Dr. Suchitra Shrivastava, Professor in the Department of Management in the Sage Group of Institutions. Now, this is the second lecture in the series of lectures on measures of variation. Now, in the previous lecture, we spoke about a measure of variation. That is, what is a measure of variation and uh, what are the different common measures of variations. We spoke about the range, quartile deviation, average deviation, standard deviation, coefficient of variation, and let me tell you, there are many other methods of finding the variation. Now, in today's lecture, we will be talking about absolute and relative measures of variation. Any measure of variation can be classified as either an absolute measure of variation or a relative measure. When we say it is an absolute measure, it is expressed in the unit of the distribution. Let us understand. The absolute measures of variation quantify the dispersion or spread of the data in the original units of measurement. For example, kilograms, centimeters, rupees, inches, and so on. Now, a relative measure of variation is also known as the coefficient of dispersion. Now, this is unitless, that is, it does not contain any units. This is basically in the form of a ratio and it is generally expressed in the form of a percentage. Let us understand the usage of the absolute and the relative measures. Now, absolute measures are used to know the actual amount of variation in a data set. The relative measures are used to compare variation between two or more data sets. Now, the second point is the comparison. Now, absolute measure is not suitable when the data sets have different units or they are expressed in different units. For example, if we have two data sets, one is expressed in say kilogram and the other is expressed in centimeters, then we cannot compare these two data sets. That is, we cannot find out which data set has higher variability. Now, coming to the relative measure. Now, in my example, once we convert the absolute measure into a relative measure, say for example, we have converted these units into a percentage, then we can say that which data set has got higher variability, right? So suppose a data set A has got a variability of 20% and B has got variability of 10%. A 20, B 10. So we can say that A has got higher variability. Now coming to the third point, dependence on scale. Now, absolute measures depend on the scale of measurement. On the other hand, the relative measures are independent of the scale of measurement. Now, the common examples of absolute measures are range, quartile deviation, mean deviation, standard deviation, and so on. On the other hand, relative measures are coefficient of range, coefficient of quartile deviation, coefficient of average deviation, coefficient of variation, etc. Now, continuing our discussion about the comparison of an absolute and relative measure. Now, let us see how we interpret these values. An absolute measure shows the magnitude of the dispersion directly. For example, if the difference between the highest and the lowest marks is say 10 marks, then we can say that the dispersion is of 10 marks, right? Now, in a relative measure, it shows the proportion of the dispersion in relation to an average or the size. Now, in this case, we express the variability in terms of a percentage. Now, let us see where it is suited or applicable. Now, absolute measure is used for studying variation within a single data set, whereas a relative measure is used for comparing consistency of variability among different data sets. Now, an important thing is that these data sets could be expressed in different units of measurement. Now, just an example, we can say that the standard deviation of marks is say 8 marks. Earlier I have given the difference between the highest and the lowest marks as say 10 marks in some particular case. Similarly, we can say that the standard deviation is of say 8 marks. Likewise, now if we were to express it as a relative measure, we could for example say that a coefficient of variation in the data set is say 12%. So in this lecture we have studied about the difference between the absolute and the relative measures of variation. I hope the concept is clear to you. We will be studying about the different measures of variation in a later lecture. Thank you students for your attention and time.